till I read this, I didn't know that there are actually so many standards. Okay, so that shows the spread of Mr. Lunia's involvement with various standards and his contribution to the nation in this direction. He is also a consultant and a trainer for many of the above. He is empaneled with many state and central councils like the National Productivity Council for LMS, as well as national NSC, etc., etc. Not only being in these areas, he has diffused this rich knowledge and experience with more than 750 organizations as a consultant, and I'm sure that with many more through knowledge sharing sessions like this. He's also an author and an instructor, and he has authored books. He has authored articles in national and international magazines. And I was surprised that amidst all of this, Mr. Lunia has found time to have his passion for distance running as well as river rafting. So we can understand his, the urge to be close to nature, I think, is a natural streak that is running through Lunia. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Shri Amit Lunia for this knowledge sharing session. Please give him a big hand.
Namaskar.
Over to you, Lunia.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. And, I request Mr. Amit Lunia to share his presentation now.
Namaskar and Vanakkam. My name is Amit Lunia. So I thank Sir Mr. Sundar Rajan for introducing me so nicely. So in this session, I'll be discussing with you the concept of process performance indicators, though these are very, very simple concepts that I'll be discussing. All of us will have an understanding of the subject that I'll be discussing, because I have an understanding after working in so many standards that the easiest thing to implement is whatever is the most simple one. So what is a process performance indicators? What are the characteristics? How do we define a process performance character indicator? What is the difference between a PPI and a KPI? So these are the things I will be discussing in this short period. So as I have been introduced by Honorable BSR sir, so I'll just take just 2 minutes more. I'll share this slide. Yeah. So this is what my profile is. I have been working in many areas, and these are the subjects I train, and these are the publications. So this is what I do. So the whatever I'm sharing with you has come from the knowledge of my consulting, HSC, NDT, energy, and other systems that I have. These are the standards I have been implementing in these particular years. So you can see that these are all standards, and based on this, I've come to say understand that if we can keep it simple, it will give us much more benefits and advantages. So I have some other talks like we unclutter organization from jargons, formats, objectives, and KPIs, or localizing 5S for the organization, or implementing ISO 9000 and DWM for a low-cost world-class organization, or making effective and simple quality plan. Use attribute chart for simplify inspection, reducing inspection cost by simplification. And in fact, the last talk I had was low cost predictive maintenance for maintenance cost reduction. So my concept of the entire thing is that keep it simple. We all have the other S, so I will not be using that. So the keeping it simple, I'll be discussing the topic of management by PPI. So we all understand what is a process and why it is important for us, and what is the importance of a business process. So business process does not mean that it has to be for a manufacturing setup. Even in organizations such as mine, where we work for organizations or we work for large scale organizations, if we understand that the concept of process is important for us to survive, important for us to work on, and we understand that how we have to optimize the process, we understand what is a process. So any organization, whether it is service oriented, or a manufacturing setup or an organization such as ours, we can understand business and we can go for this. So these are the measurement systems where we can understand that how our process is moving. So they can be automated also to evaluate the success of an organization. So this is a slide I am very fond of giving. In fact, all my 22 standards presentation that I gave, I have this slide with me. So in that, I basically tells that how this process works and why the effectiveness and efficiency are the two criteria by which we monitor our processes. And as far as the ITF, the three important goals of this process, that there should be zero defect in the process. There should be reduced variation and waste in the system, and that should be continual improvement. So this slide I have been using in all of my slides. In fact, I have more than 25 presentations whereby I explain this particular slide. So this is what the process is all about. So having an indicator, we all understand that there is a turtle diagram to explain what is a process. So in that, the performance indicators are very, very important. So we understand that there is a supplier, there is an input, there is a process, there is an output, and there is a customer. And the entire concept is monitored by performance indicators. So it is a very important requirement that the entire business process cycle is monitored or evaluated based on the performances that we have. So the key instrument to carry out this evaluation is the means of the process performance indicators. So it is convenient to integrate the concept of PPI into the entire process cycles. We all know that the balanced scorecard was introduced in 1992, and that basically led to an explosion of the various indicators. Now we have a mechanism like EFQM, we have a COVID system in place, or ITIL system in place, which has basically focused on the process parameters. So these are essentially tools we all understand, and they also reflect the critical success factors. Now these critical success factors are nothing but the programs that we have so that we can achieve our objectives or we can achieve our target values. So the concept of understanding difference between a KPI and a PPI. So to understand in a very small way, simple way, they are subset of the more familiar understanding of the key performance indicators. So basically they focus on so if you think them, so they are the operational level metrics, whereas the KPI are the broader, more strategic level measurements. So KPIs are set of quantifiable measures used to compare performance in terms of meeting the goals. So the basic difference between KPI can be defined by the scope of the indicators. So I'll be discussing what are the scope of indicators, the objectivity of data, the financial relations, and the concept of automation of the process. So this is what is the major difference between a KPI and a PPI. So basically the PPIs are not a replacement of KPI, but they supplement for a organization to understand that the competitive advantages is within the process excellence. So this is what is the concept between KPI and PPI. The purpose of PPI is that there is a clarity in the data, that we have a focus of what we want to do. There is an improvement that we want to achieve. Yeah, so there is an engagement of the people, and then improve communication, improve learning in the system. I'll also share what are the various advantages of having good PPIs. So the PPIs should be measured for any processes in terms of process efficiency, process effectiveness, process compliances. Now these process compliances are very, very important requirement. The throughput time and output quality. So these are the 5 basic measures. There are more 16 that I'll also be discussing with you. But these are the 5 basic requirements that should be measured for any process. So efficiency, effectiveness, compliance, throughput time, and output quality. So these are the 16. So they include productivity, they have the cycle time, the turnover time. You can also include the takt time requirements, the error rate requirement, the effectiveness, the timeliness, the value, the quality rate, profitability. So these kind of process matrices can be part of the PPIs. Now, based on the various requirements of the processes, We can have PPIs or in terms of quality, in terms of environment, in terms of safety, sustainability, HR, finances, energy, social accountability. So we are required to have process. We can have process performance indicators for almost all the requirements that we are supposed to meet. And the process performance indicators can be used for objectives. So identifying the objectives, achieving them, to meet the risk requirements, to meet the process performance requirement, and also to ensure the control requirements. So these are the 4 areas where the process indicators can be utilized. So now this is an important slide that we will be discussing, that how to select a PPI. So there are certain requirements for PPI. So the first requirement is that there should be a consistency of representation target. That means the PPI should reflect the process performance indicators should reflect the targets that we are going to achieve. So all the process performances, whatever we want to have achieved, they should be there. So the mapping should thoroughly verify that what kind of indicators we are requiring, and what processes we are going to cover, and what kind of. So for example, there can be a simple PPI such as total number of goods sold. Now that one PPI would cover the entire marketing effort. So in future there can be, if they manage to, suppose the marketing divides that total goods sold in a quarter, etc. So then that would replace the first one. So whatever PPIs we have, it should cover the entire requirement, entire process as a part of the target. The second requirement is the level of details need to be defined. So suppose the level of details, it should not be excessive, it should not be less. Suppose for example, a level of detail would say that plus minus 10 kg is acceptable in terms of the data that is to be covered. Now 1 gram per plus minus per day would also be a data which is required, but that is too excessive. So the level of detail that we want should reflect the requirements from a process. So this is the second criteria when we are selecting a PPI. The third would be that a PPI should not ensure a non-counter productivity. Like for example, a PPI asks you to have increased number of production, but that does not mean increased number of failure also, or increased number of safety incidents also. So whatever we are defining as a part of the PPI, it should also define that there should not be a counter productivity result out of it. So that is the third requirement criteria for a PPI selection. The fourth is what is the what is the economic impact. So economic impact can be in terms of what is the cost of identifying, what is the impact that it is going to see, how much time it is going to take to collect the data. So the economic impact of the PPIs also has to be established. The fifth requirement is that the PPI should be simple to use. So simple in terms of it is easy for you to understand, for the user to understand, because the data would be collected by someone who would be there as a part of the process ownership, who would be there as the process owner there. So it should be simple for him to understand, because we have seen that more complex PPIs. I am also working in railway standards, which are ISO 22163, where there is a requirement of RAMs and LCC. So RAMs is basically reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety. So there are process performance indicators maintaining that requirement. But the calculation is so difficult for reliability and availability for the locomotive systems, or for the safety components of a locomotive system, that sometimes it requires a huge kind of software to monitor that activity. So simplicity of use is a very, very important requirement, so that it is directly proportional to the time spent to take the data. So the lesser we have the time spent to collect the data, the more simple a PPI is there to use. Then exhaustiveness, the data collected, it should be very, very exhaustive. Whatever PPI should be very exhaustive. All the processes, whether they are the market-oriented processes, the customer-oriented processes, or they are the business-oriented processes, the PPI should cover all the processes. So the exhaustiveness of the data has to be ensured. The data should be exhaustive. It should not leave anything which reduces the impact of the PPI. So the data should treat all part of the process, all part of the system, so that there is nothing which is omitted. Then there is a concept of non-redundancy. If a data negates another data, or a data which affects other data, then the concept of non-redundancy has to be understood. So the non-redundancy of PPI is to be ensured when we are selecting a PPI. Then the monotony of data. If the data So when I'm talking of the non-redundancy also, here we can also think of the balanced scorecard system. So there should be a balance of data which is there as a part of the PPI. So the concept of balanced scorecard in terms of the financial issues, in terms of the people, in terms of the processes, in terms of the improvement activities, they can all be part of the PPI. So the non-redundancy of data would be an important criteria for PPI selection. Then monotony of data. So monotony also means if the indicator is not associated with the increase or decrease of the derived indicator, then the principle of monotony is not there. So basically, if a sub indicator is increasing or decreasing, then my primary indicator should also increase or decrease. So that concept has to be seen. That means all the effects of the sub indicator should be reflecting on the major indicator. So this is one concept that we need to understand, that if the primary processes have certain sub indicators, the primary indicator has certain sub indicators, then the changes in the sub indicator should be reflected as per the scale in the primary indicator. So that is the concept of monotony. Then the compensation factor should be there. If a data is compensating some other data, suppose a variation of a sub indicator is there, and that makes the data of the derived indicator change, or it cancels some other kind of data, then the concept of compensation is there, and then that can be accepted. Then long-term goals of PPIs. So long-term goals in terms of whatever the organization wants, whatever the process owners want, or whatever like for example, you want to reduce lead time, or you want to increase the time for reduce the project time, or you want to improve the on time or takt time of a process, then these long-term goals can also be associated with the PPI. And also finally, the impact on the stakeholders. So whatever is the impact on the stakeholder in terms of maybe cost reduction, or maybe in terms of cycle time reductions, or maybe in terms of staff efficiency, so that also becomes a criteria for PPI selection. So these 16 requirements, these requirements are very, very important. So I'll repeat again. So the target has to be it should be complete. The data, the PPI should reflect the entire process. The level of detail should match with the requirement. So if a data is countering productivity, like if there is a counter for a data, suppose I say increase in production, and if it reflects in increase in non-conformity also, or QDC also, then the data is counting the productivity requirement, and that should be taken, care should be taken. Then the economic impact. So if the data collection has a lot of economic impact, then that has to be seen, that whether what the cost is really worth it or not. Simplicity of use, exhaustiveness of the data, not a single process should be left. Non-redundancy of data, monotony is another. Then compensation of data, where the two data match each other or negate each other. Then the PPI should also meet the long-term goals, and the impact on the stakeholders. So these criteria of PPI selection should be taken care of whenever we are finalizing the entire PPIs. So basically the concept so far is that we have primary and the second, the customer oriented and the business oriented processes. Then all the processes should have adequate indicators. The indicators are basically the raw data which comes out from the processes, and that raw data should be taken to further improve or further act on. So there is a huge amount of raw data which comes out from the PPIs. So when I say PPI, and if I want to determine a PPI, So there are certain requirements I should define for a PPI. I should define that what purpose and goal my PPI should have, who are the audience and who have the access to the PPI, what are the performance question I should ask from a performance indicator, that what I am supposed to look at, why, how I'm going to use my indicators. The name of the indicator is also very, very important because it will help understand, make people understand the data collection method, which is there to be defined, that how the PPI, the data has to be collected, what if there is a scaling required for PPI, then how the scale would be there. If there is a formula in a PPI, like for example, if reliability is one of the data, efficiency is one, then we should also define the formula or the assessment method. The targets and the performance threshold, if you have a target, then that should be assigned with the PPI. The source of data, the collation of data becomes a very, very important requirement. Then the data collection frequency, then how to collect the data, what the frequency should be, what the reporting mechanisms should be, what should be the reporting frequency, and we can also define the evaluation frequency, then when the PPI would be evaluated. The difference between a PPI and KPI would be that the data evaluation frequency would be much reduced, lesser than the frequency of a KPI. The KPI may be a quarter or a 6 months, the PPI may be daily or a weekly base. And then who is going to do the data entry? That responsibility should also be assigned. The expiry date, that when the PPI is going to be reviewed or revised, that also should be defined, maybe once in a year, maybe once in a quarter, maybe once during process review mechanism. So that also should be defined, and also there should be an estimate that how much it will cost us to collect a PPI. So once we have defined this PPI, we have checked the PPI against that criteria. We now have a set of PPIs which help us to cover entire activities of the processes. Now, if we have a PPI in place, it defines that how to, they should value the drivers, they should be defined by the process managers and the process owners, they should be cascaded to entire organizational processes based on either corporate standards or guidelines. They are based on valid data, they are understandable, they are relevant, and they lead to positive actions and performances. So this is what is the criteria for evaluating a very good PPI, because the PPI has to be understood, because once we use the word management by PPI, that means the involvement of the employees, the involvement of the process owners, the involvement of the process managers should be there, because there are the 7 stages of data, starting from the data collation, data collection, data presentation, data monitoring, the corrective actions and the preventive actions. Sorry, not the corrective actions and the risk assessment, the risk evaluation method. So they will all have to include everybody. So that's why the importance of a good PPI is very much relevant to any kind of process. So the process performance indicators, how we'll be defining them. So first we have to define what process they belong to, how they are calculated, including the formula, what target is there in a defined period, who would provide the measure, when the PPI is to be reported and to who is in charge of defining relations. So that should be defined when we are defining a process performance indicator. This is the general format that we use: process, PPI, the formula, the unit of measurement, the frequency of measurement, the responsibility, the target, the Q1 in base of Q1, Q2, etc. Or similarly, in case department also the monthly basis, etc. The plan and actual percentage. So this is the format generally used, and then we have various dashboards, etc. To support the PPIs and the data. Now, where do we use the PPIs? How do we use the PPIs? The PPIs can be used for leadership and delegation of power. So as we delegate the PPIs, the entire the gamut or the entire life cycle of the PPI. That means the business process life cycle, the collection of data, the evaluation of data, to down the line, the delegation of power goes along with the data. We can define controls in terms of SPC, inspections, cost reductions whenever we use a PPI. So we can define based on the PPIs the controls we want to establish. The PPIs can be evolved from a PPI to a KPI, to objectives, to goals, to strategies, and finally to the business plans. The PPIs can be used for training and communication. The PPIs can be used for developing process intelligence and also of automation of data, because the PPI has less human involvement. There is less subjectivity of the data. Automation of collection of PPI is a very good opportunity for us to understand. And we, as compared to the KPI, where there is a human bias, which is acceptable, and basically the human bias is introduced in the KPI. The PPI can have a better automation opportunities. There are certain software modeling also, which are there to collect the data from, and there is a description logic which is defined when we are establishing a PPI and a data collection system. So finally, we have the process review mechanism in place. The PPI should be reviewed regularly. So most of the organizations already have these kind of reviews. So basically the analysis of PPIs, the process PPI relevance, the corrective actions resulting from PPIs, they are similar to KPIs. If you see, the concept of handling a PPI would be very similar to concept of handling a KPI, except that the difference in terms of a PPI, the difference between the scope of PPI or the financial aspect of the PPI, or the objectivity of data that we have of the PPI, and also the automation of data. So these four differences there. The handling mechanism of a PPI is exactly similar to that of a KPI. So finally, we see that the PPI, the improvement of this is, as well as the outcome that requires the development of objective performance measure. So that will measure the structure, processes, outcomes, including all areas, and require a multidisciplinary collaborative approach. So all processes are to be included, all processes are to be verified. The PPIs can be linked with the objective of the process, they can be linked with the risk of the process, the control of the processes, and the automation of the processes. They can be a very good tool while determining the IoT requirements. The PPIs can also be used for personal well-being. We can have PPIs for well-being of our employees also. So financial indicators, health indicators, the emotional indicators, the social indicators, educational indicators, the growth indicators. So PPIs, use of PPIs can be there at the personal level also. So the PPIs can be integrated with the help of the tools within the performance system. So we have the performance scorecard, the KPI or PPI catalog, the dashboard systems, the performance review meeting, the process review meetings. Individual performance plan can be used. It can be used to do the performance evaluation of individuals, including the communication with the individuals. And at personal level, we can have our own indicators. So this is what is the concept of a PPI. So thank you. That was all I wanted to complete in a very short time. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very simple explanation about a topic which we normally take it granted. We understand, like, we all understand about this KPI, PPIs and all that. And very often we are using this in our process to define our processes effectiveness and efficiency. So thank you very much. We have a question, sir. Just a minute, sir. The question is like how the PPIs are linked with lead and lag indicators.
So what is the leading, and if you are looking in for future, we say it is a leading indicator. If you are looking at the past, we say it is a lagging indicator. So it is basically the process performances. So you can convert that, what kind of process performance. Suppose you have an interpolation activity going on. You want to define the concept of the process across. So then that can be, you want to see how the process is going to behave over a period of time. Then perhaps you can have some kind of leading indicators. And then there can, so the concept, the treatment of leading and lagging indicator for a PPI is exactly same for a leading and lagging indicator for a key performance indicator. So there is not so much difference between the two.
Okay, so many often in our organizations, when we talk about the process, other terminologies also we are using, like, activity, system, etc. So how to understand the difference between a system, process, activity, and how to relate this KPI and PPI along with this kind of words.
Correct, correct. I think you have given me a very good platform to work on. Can I share another slide of mine? Right.
Yeah,
So
sure.
that will help you to understand the difference between all of them. Just give me 2 minutes. Where it is? Share folder. Then Nirma करने का. Sir, is a change of slide new share?
No, sir. I think you have to first unshare and then you have to share the. Yes,
Yeah.
visible, sir.
Yeah. So let me tell you the difference between all of them and how they are same. An activity is the smallest amount of work which requires a control. There are many work to be done in an organization. So activity is that work which requires a control. So the control can be in terms of a inspection. The control can be in terms of a work instruction. The control can be in terms of a operational control. The control can be in terms of a FMEA or a HERA or a aspect impact. The type of control we want over the activity, right? So that is the basic concept of activity. Let me complete it, then we can probably come down back to activity. So these activities are generally defined by SOP or a work instruction, right? And there are certain indicators of the activity indicators are there that would define that how the activity is supposed to perform. Now, when I say the activity is giving me an outcome, so the outcome can be an information, the outcome can be a work in progress, the outcome can be a documentation. I say it is a process, because if you see the definition of a process, an activity or a set of interrelated activity where input is converted into output. So that is the definition. So now I say, when I say an activity, I say the process would also be there. So when I have some outcome, I say it is a process. So now this process is governed by a risk and opportunity. The process is governed by process indicators. The process is governed by a process mapping or a turtle diagram, whatever terms we use. So when I say process, I mean there are many activities which are part of the process, and by which I am getting an outcome. So outcome can be information, it can be a knowledge shared, it can be a part product, it can be a outcome, a document or a record. So these are all processes. So an organization may have number of processes, number of repetitive processes. Now, when the processes are given a responsibility, they are shared under a responsibility, we say it is a department. Like for example, a maintenance department would have 5 kind of processes. It can have a preventive maintenance process, it can have a predictive maintenance process, it can have a breakdown maintenance process, it can have a maintenance planning or a spare parts planning processes. So these processes are there in the function, and along with that, it also has a on-the-job training process. It also has a continual improvement process. So the functions would have number of processes, and by default, it would have number of activities. So the function would be covered by a procedure. The function would be governed by an objective target. The function would be governed by roles and responsibility. That also includes the legal roles and responsibilities. And now when all the functions and by per se the processes, when they align together in a sequence to deliver the output for which the organization has been structured for, established for, we say it is a system. So the system is governed by the product. The output of the system is the product for which it is defined. A cement plant would have cement as the product. A automobile plant would have automobile as a product. My organization would have a training as a product, or a consultation as a product, or a hospital would have a treated patient as a product. So the entire system is defined in terms of processes which are integrated, which are in a sequence to deliver the product for which the system is defined. Now the system is governed by a strategy, it is governed by a vision, it is governed by, let us say, manual also. It is governed by objectives at the system level. So this is what is a system is. So system would have number of processes, because processes would always be there. It is the functions which are fluidic. Like for example, safety sometimes is a function of maintenance, or safety sometimes is a different function of health, safety and environment. We sometimes have MR as a quality, the process of the top management, or is taken by some operational head, or sometimes it is from the business head. So there would be, the function is the fluidic part. The activities will always be there, the processes would always be there, the system would always be there. And now to have a better understanding, these all words are interchangeable. It only depends from where we are looking at. So if I am looking at from the Prime Minister of India point of view, the entire railway system or entire refinery would be one activity, or entire a plant of one company would be an activity, a part of one industrial activity. If we are looking from the corporate head, it would be a process which produces something. If we are looking from the director's point of view, it would be a function delivering something. And if we are looking from the personal point of view, it is the entire system in place. So same thing, but the different distance from the process, we say it is an activity or a process or a function or a system. Now the activities are governed by activity indicators. The process are governed by risk and opportunities and process performance indicators. The functions are governed by the objectives and targets, and the systems have its own strategic goals. So this is what is the difference between an activity, process, function, and a system. And this is how the procedure, the documentation would also be there. This would be how it will be defined.
Thank you very much, sir. I think it is a quite detailed explanation what we have got about this, the various words in which often we are getting confused. So thank you very much for your explanation. Okay, another one small question is, before your turtle diagram, you have shown one slide called process approach. So can we understand like process approach and the CPOC approach is same? And will it be appropriate to add PPIs also in CPOC, like supplier input, process output, PPIs and customer? Will it be appropriate to include this?
Now let me again, 1 minute. Let me take you to the other screen. Sorry. Now let me explain this. I actually, this is one of my most favorite slide, and I'm using it everywhere. Almost all the presentation I have this slide with me. Now how do I say, a process would be input is converted into output. When we say output, as a process manager, we want desired output, but what we get is output. So what extra is the undesired output, and the extent to which we get the desired output is the definition of quality. So when I say desired output, I mean customer requirement, I mean the product requirement, I mean the legal requirement, I mean the other system requirement, right? So what I want is how the process we can define again. I have inputs, the system transform them as output. My expectation that every output should be desired output, but what I get is undesired output, that is the quality deficiency cost or cost of poor quality. So all the reject, rework, scrap, etc. And the desired output, to the extent I say this is the definition of the quality, up to what extent of physical, sensory, behavioral, temporal requirement that my product meets the requirement. So that is definition of the quality. So now how do I know that my process is delivering me the desired output or not? So I say there is a voice of the customer in terms of customer complaint, in terms of repeated orders, in terms of customer satisfaction, or I have the voice of the process. So what I do now, I do either I change my process or reform my process, or I improve my inputs. So when I say man, I mean desired competent people. When I say machine, I would use the term effective machine, overall OE machine with a good OE, or at a minimum the available machine. When I say method, I mean validated method. When I say material, I say on time in full material. When I say measurement, I mean a measurement process and output where there is a minimum variation in the system. So at a minimum, it should be calibrated equipment, and at a maximum, the entire MSA activities is there to reduce the measurement. So when I say I have this inputs in control, then my output is sure to be a desired output, and that it would define, the output would be in this term. So now there are two measurement of this process. One is efficiency and second is effectiveness. So when I say efficiency, I mean right time, right cost, right quality. When I say effectiveness, apart from efficiency, I mean it should be acceptable by the customer. And as per IATF and other requirement, I think there are three expectations from the process. First of all, it should create defect-free output. Secondly, there should be minimum waste and variation. And third, there should be continual improvement. So when I am designing a process, I would look into the risk of the process also. Now the turtle diagram would come. So once I am into defining this process, I would say the supplier, the inputs I have defined, what kind of inputs are there. So the inputs would be in terms of by whom, by with what resources, how it has to be done, the risk and opportunity related to the process, the ownership of the process, because there would be a process owner and there would be a process manager. The output would be defined in terms of the product, in terms of the information, in terms of the documentation, in terms of the knowledge awareness or knowledge, organization knowledge also. And then the performance indicators. Now this is where the role of the PPI would come. That what is the importance of this process, what kind of process performance indicators I would like to have in the system, and whatever criteria that we have discussed earlier, we can slowly build up on this performance indicators. And as we meet this match this performance indicators with our objectives, we can say these performance indicators are also part of our key performance indicators. So this is how this process would be correlating with the process performance indicators.
Oh, can I add, Mr. Amit,
Yes, sir.
to just answer to Mr. Manoj Kumar's question?
Yes, sir.
So the CPOC is closer to this turtle diagram. The earlier slide is a little macro conceptual, whereas in CPOC you have only supplier input, process and output and customer. Here the corresponding indicators are also there, and the owners and the risk and opportunities added. So it is by and large synonymous to CPOC, this turtle diagram. Thank you.
This turtle diagram, sir, is nothing but a schematic diagram of a process map, right? And there are certain standards like the ISO 22163, which is railway specific TS. There is a mandatory requirement that all the knockout questions, there are 10 knockout questions, whereby there is a failure of the entire process on the railways TS system, that they should have a turtle diagram for these mandatory processes. So this is a schematic diagram of a process map. And the process map generally is defined by the CPOC, as you rightly said, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, for your detailed explanation about all the questions. And with this, I think we have done with today's questions what we were having for you. And I think it's a time to thanks for all the efforts which you have put and the efforts what participants has put by sparing their time today's schedule. From today's Saturday, they could make out the time and attend the session. So to convey the thanks, I'll request the Vice President of our chapter, Mr. Thomas Matthew, to deliver the word of thanks with his closing remarks. Mr. Thomas Matthew, please.
Thank you, Vishwa. Honorable Speaker of the Day, Mr. Amit Lunia, and President and other members of ISQ Chennai chapter, and the ISQ members who has joined from other chapters and all others who has joined today. So today's session was a perfect recipe to end a tiring week. Today is the weekend. So even though the topic of management of process performance parameters or indicators, which all of us know and is familiar with, how sharply it can be employed to enhance the performance was explained by Mr. Amit in his very short session. I know this time was very, very limited, but even in that, with that limitations, Mr. Amit has explained that in such a beautiful way. As the management guru, Peter Drucker usually says, you cannot manage or control what you cannot measure. In other words, we cannot say a process is success or not unless there is a performance measure which is defined and measured. Even if we all know that these things everybody use in daily life, the way Mr. Amit has explained this today has given a different dimension for the whole concept. So if I summarize a few takeaways from Mr. Amit's session, few things I have noted down in this short span of time. So first of all, this is not a normally debated or heard of topic, even though it is widely used by everyone. So the uniqueness of the topic, that was the first thing which has come to my mind. And again, the very sharp definitions. Many times we use this KPI and PPI interchangeably, but the very sharp definitions what was given by Mr. Amit, and also the purpose of PPIs, and the definitions which he follows the principle of keep it simple, and also the basic requirements. I think Mr. Amit has mentioned about the 16 number of requirements of the PPIs. That was very, very convincing. And finally, how to convert this raw data of PPI to a useful decision-making metrics, and the usage of PPIs and how the PPIs can move to a KPI through the objectives, goals, and strategies. So it was very useful, sir, and it has given a lot of in-depth into our thought process. So now let me get into my assigned task, that is proposing vote of thanks. First of all, let me express our deep gratitude on my personal behalf and on behalf of the Chennai ISQ chapter to Mr. Amit Lunia for accepting our invitation and giving us an inspiring talk on not much talked about topic and which took us to a greater heights. His involvement in this topic and in-depth knowledge was evident. Thank you, sir, for taking out time for your busy schedule and spending such a valuable time with us. And I know there is a paucity of time as most of you are eagerly waiting to view the first IPL match of the session. I don't want to take much of your time. So in a single sentence, may I thank each one of you for making this session interesting and interactive and lively, and look forward for many more like this in future. Thank you and have a very good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your word of thanks and closing remarks. I think in a very brief manner, you have concluded the session. So thank you very much. Yes, sir. Sundar, sir?
It was a T20 conclusion, I said, not a test match conclusion.
Yes, T20 conclusion. Okay, guys. So with this, thank you very much once again. And we are concluding today's session, today's program with this now. Thank you very much and keep joining us for our future programs too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Vishwa.
Mr. Amit. Thank you, Mr. Amit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amit.
Thank you very much, sir.